Welcome to another episode, everyone. This individual told the authorities, he made it extremely clear that if you transfer me to this prison, they are going to kill me because I'm a snitch. He predicted his own death in real time. They transferred him to the prison anyway. And when they did, they killed him. Let's get into it.
Inside a quiet federal cell at USP Beaumont, a man lay motionless on the top bunk while blood slowly darkened sheets. Guards walked past without urgency, like nothing unusual waited behind that steel door. Earlier that day, he kept repeating one sentence to anyone listening, saying they're moving him again. No names mattered yet, and no background explained why his fear sounded rehearsed. It just felt like somebody already knew this ending was coming. So the real question sits heavy. How does someone predict their death and still get delivered anyway? To understand how that cell ever became his final stop, it helps to go back to Washington, D.C. during the mid-1990s, when Keith Barnes was still a teenager navigating adult spaces early. He spent time around older guys who moved with confidence, absorbing patterns and habits without fully grasping where they led. In Southwest D.C., street survival blurred into everyday life, making risky situations feel normal instead of dangerous. Keith did not run anything, yet staying close to the wrong people placed him within reach of consequences he could not control later. That closeness turned critical in April 1996, when a robbery plan came together involving Keith and 3 associates slightly older than him. The target was Israel Jones, known locally as Dog, whose apartment was believed to hold cash from drug sales. Once the door got kicked in and the place came up empty, panic replaced planning almost instantly. 2 men left to search for Jones outside, while Keith remained inside with James Carpenter, waiting as tension built. When Jones was later forced back into his apartment at gunpoint, the situation shifted from robbery to something far worse. Inside that space, fear escalated quickly, pushing decisions that no one slowed down enough to reconsider. A gun was shoved into Jones's mouth and fired, killing him on the spot, which locked everyone present into the same outcome legally. Keith later said he stepped into another room before the shot, yet that distinction carried little weight once a life had been taken. Police response came fast, helped by witnesses who saw parts of the kidnapping unfold in public view. Arrests followed quickly, leaving no room for stories to be shaped quietly. Keith Barnes was 17 when murder charges landed on him, placing adult consequences on a teenager overnight. Long before court proceedings started, the streets had already labeled everyone involved, fixing reputations that would not soften with time. Facing life imprisonment at 17 forced Keith Barnes into decisions most adults never confront. Prosecutors made it clear that silence offered no protection, especially with multiple defendants and witness accounts already established. Keith understood that remaining quiet would not.
Yeah, and snitching offers no protection either, as Keith found out. The prosecutors are telling him he's 17 years old. Obviously, he's young and impressionable. And we come to find out, actually, that a lot of these snitches snitched when they were younger. I know some individuals, people say, well, they were young. I mean, that's true. A lot of these individuals are impressionable and they're scared to death. Not when they have the gun in their hand, not when they're robbing someone, not when they're gang attacking someone on the street. They're not scared then, but they're scared to death when they go to prison or they go to jail and they're going to court facing the rest of their life behind bars. And when this takes shape, they oftentimes crumble under the pressure of the possibility, the potentiality of losing their very life. And they snitch. Here you have a situation where the prosecutor is telling him, silence offers you no protection. Go ahead, spill the beans. Tell us everything that you know. And what, we'll protect you? They didn't even protect him. They didn't even keep him from the prison, that he's telling them, imploring them, beseeching him to keep him from. Do not send me, as we're going to find out, do not send me to this prison. They did anyway, after he told on this case right here. They put the gun in the old boy's mouth, robbing him, and pulled the trigger. Now, he's 17 years old, and the prosecutor is telling him, hey, you better save yourself. But no, that is not saving yourself. That's putting yourself in danger. That's what happened here.
Undo his involvement, even if he was not the shooter. That realization pushed him toward cooperation, despite knowing how that choice would echo far beyond the courtroom. Agreeing to testify meant turning against people he once associated with, including James Carpenter, who Keith identified as the man that fired the fatal shot. Word of his cooperation spread quickly through holding cells and street connections. Threats surfaced almost immediately, including a handwritten note warning of revenge that did not rely on loud language to make its point. The message suggested enemies would appear from places Keith never expected, reinforcing how permanent his decision had become. Keith believed cooperation would reduce his sentence, especially after prosecutors supported a plea tied to second-degree murder. He walked into court expecting accountability to come with some measure of leniency. Instead, the judge rejected the recommendation outright and imposed a sentence of 15 years to life. That moment stripped away any remaining belief that the system would balance risk with protection. Leaving the courtroom, Keith carried more than a long sentence, since he also walked out with a label that followed him everywhere. Inside prison culture, being known as a snitch outweighed age.
That's how it works. Makes no sense. How do you snitch and still get life in prison? Many people have. Some people say, I didn't tell, I got life. Now you still told, they just still gave you life. They don't give a damn. You done told, did all this, telling, allegedly, and still got 15 years to life in prison. Make it make sense, man. If you're gonna tell, at least go home. Shit, you're gonna send me to prison for life and I just told on every damn body. That makes no sense. These dudes are doing everything backwards with all of this snitching. Because as I said, many people that have life in prison, they told on their case, but they still got sentenced to life. They didn't make the deal correctly. They didn't make it clear. I'm giving y'all this information. I want out of here. Or however it went down. Dumb. Makes no sense. Not only do they still give you life in prison, but then they send you to prison and do not protect you. Clearly, he was not even in PC. He was not in protective custody. It doesn't sound like they had his ass on the main line with everyone knowing that he's a snitch. And again, he asked them, do not transfer me to this certain prison, where apparently he had fear of some individuals up there. He knew some people were up there that wanted his head. And they sent him anyway. So much for being one of the good guys, so much for being on the cop side, snitching for the government. This is the outcome. You snitch, you still get life in prison, and then they do not protect you once you get in prison. You lose your life once you get in prison. You get life in prison and then lose your life in prison. What the hell did you snitch for? Jeez.
Remorse, or legal nuance. That word traveled faster than his name during transfers, counts, and housing assignments. From that point forward, Keith Barnes existed under a mark that time, distance, or good behavior could not erase. Once Keith Barnes entered federal custody, movement became constant, which mattered deeply for inmates tied to Washington, D.C., since the district lacks long-term prisons, D.C. Inmates get scattered across federal facilities nationwide. That dispersal keeps street politics alive, since familiar names resurface inside compounds thousands of miles apart. Information travels quietly through paperwork glimpses, phone calls, transport buses, and whispered conversations between housing units. For someone labeled a cooperator, each transfer increased visibility instead of offering any relief. By February 2002, Barnes was designated to the United States Penitentiary Coleman in Florida, a high-security federal complex, Coleman housed a sizable population of Washington, D.C. inmates, which immediately raised Barnes's concern about recognition. Shared hometown ties often turn hostile inside prison culture, especially when past cooperation becomes known. Barnes understood that proximity to familiar faces carried risks staff rarely acknowledged fully. That awareness forced him into constant vigilance inside an already tense environment. Those fears became real in August 2003 when Barnes was assaulted by another DC inmate inside Coleman. During that attack, Barnes's arm was violently pulled from its socket, causing serious injury. Staff intervened only after damage occurred, responding once violence had already finished its work. Medical treatment followed, though the deeper issue of placement remained unresolved. That assault confirmed Barnes's belief that general population exposure placed him in direct danger. Following the attack, officials placed Barnes in the special housing unit under protective custody conditions. Although labeled protective, that status meant near total isolation with 23-hour daily lockdown. Barnes remained confined for months, separated from programs, work assignments, and meaningful human contact. Protective custody felt less like safety and more like extended punishment layered onto his sentence. That environment wore him down mentally while offering no long-term solution. While housed in segregation, Barnes began writing letters nonstop to prison administrators and outside officials. He explained his cooperation history, his prior assault, and his fear of further retaliation. Barnes did not request release or sentence reduction during those appeals. He asked only for separation from DC inmates to avoid recognition. Each letter carried urgency, reflecting his understanding that placement decisions could end everything instantly. Barnes eventually contacted Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, detailing his situation from inside federal custody. Norton forwarded his concerns to Bureau of Prisons Director Harley Lappin in December 2004. The response redirected responsibility back to Coleman administrators rather than providing immediate intervention. Officials emphasized the need for Barnes to identify specific threats, despite his inability to name unknown enemies. That bureaucratic approach ignored how prison violence actually unfolds. As weeks passed, Barnes recognized that safety inside federal custody depended entirely on placement accuracy. One wrong housing decision could expose him to people carrying old loyalties and unresolved grudges. He understood that transfers often brought fresh risks rather than clean slates. That realization stayed with him as further movements loomed. Barnes knew survival depended less on behavior and more on where the system decided to drop him next. After months in segregation, Keith Barnes kept writing letters with growing urgency, hoping repetition might force attention. He addressed wardens, case managers, regional administrators, describing assaults, threats, and constant exposure concerns. Each letter laid out his cooperation history, his prior injury, and his fear of recognition. Barnes avoided emotional language, sticking to details that administrators usually claim to respect. Still, those letters moved slowly through channels that treated danger like routine correspondence. Barnes eventually reached beyond prison walls by contacting Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton from Washington, D.C. In his message, he explained that federal placement repeatedly put him near inmates tied to his past case. Norton took the concern seriously enough to contact Bureau of Prisons Director Harley Lappin directly. Her inquiry carried political weight, forcing internal review instead of quiet dismissal. For Barnes, that outreach felt like his last credible option. The response from prison leadership arrived dressed in careful bureaucratic language that sounded reassuring on paper. Officials acknowledged Barnes's prior assault while emphasizing procedural limitations. They stated protection required identifying specific inmates posing direct threats. That requirement ignored how prison violence works, especially for cooperators targeted through reputation. Barnes could not name faces he had never met or anticipate future arrivals. Administrators framed safety as a manageable issue, handled through monitoring and classification systems. They promised Barnes would not be housed near known threats already documented. That assurance assumed threats announced themselves clearly, which rarely happens inside prison culture. Danger often arrives quietly, carried by word of mouth rather than paperwork.
So they want him to give up some names. He doesn't know any names at this juncture. This is how it is. In prison, when you are debriefing, they call it debriefing, snitching, you want off of the yard. You want to go into protective custody for whatever reason. Well, the police, and I've said this before, will not let you go to protective custody until and unless you debrief, meaning give them information, particularly all of the information that you know, all of the information that you have regarding whatever faction or said group that you belong to. I believe that the reasoning for this, well, for one, they want to humiliate you. They want you to be a snitch, and they want this information. And secondly, they are not going to send you to protective custody until they know that you really are PC. Because you might be a killer, a shot caller, that's trying to get to protective custody to attack someone that's over there in protective custody, to go over there and kill someone that's in protective custody that may be a chomo or that may have killed your brother or did some stuff with one of your children or something. And you find out he's over there in protective custody, so you raise your hand, tell the policeman, I want off this yard, I'm going PC, I'm protective custody. The whole time, you ain't none of that. You're just trying to get over there and get at this dude. So they gonna make you get him some information that's gonna really make you protective custody before they send you. They want information that you can't come back from once you give them. So here they're asking this individual, what are the names of the people that you believe are going to attack you? Man, I don't know their names. I don't even know what they look like. They just gonna come from out of nowhere. What are you talking about? That was their reasoning for not fully protecting him, I guess. But let's see, man, this is crazy.
Barnes understood that distinction immediately, even if officials did not. Inside federal custody, reputation spreads faster than official records ever update. Inmates learn names, cases, and histories during transport, intake, or casual conversation. Barnes knew his cooperation against James Carpenter had traveled far beyond any single facility. Each transfer meant new ears hearing old stories. That reality made requests for specific threat identification feel disconnected from lived experience. As weeks passed, Barnes began recognizing a deeper pattern in how the system handled risk. Administrators treated danger as a hypothetical problem solved through forms and procedures. Barnes experienced danger as immediate and unpredictable, shaped by human memory rather than databases. Those two perspectives never aligned. The gap between them kept widening with every response letter. Barnes did not ask for witness protection or extraordinary measures during these exchanges. He asked only for separation from Washington, D.C., inmates to limit recognition. That request seemed reasonable given his documented assault history. Still, officials responded cautiously, emphasizing resource constraints and institutional norms. Each reply pushed responsibility back onto Barnes without offering meaningful solutions. By late April 2005, Barnes understood that safety inside federal custody existed mostly in theory. Protective language did not translate into protective action when transfers approached. Placement decisions continued happening without his input, despite repeated warnings. Barnes began expressing concern that future moves could expose him instantly. That realization settled heavily as rumors about upcoming transfers circulated. At that point, Barnes no longer believed any facility guaranteed protection. The system viewed risk as manageable through procedure. Barnes viewed risk as unavoidable once his name resurfaced. That difference shaped how he interpreted every administrative response. For him, safety had become an abstract promise detached from daily reality. By late spring 2005, Keith Barnes started hearing movement talk inside the unit, which immediately tightened his nerves. Transfers rarely arrived quietly, since inmates usually learned before paperwork ever became official. Barnes picked up rumors that his next stop would land him somewhere unfamiliar. Instead of relief, those whispers triggered fear built from years of experience. He understood transfers often reshuffled danger rather than reducing exposure. Barnes passed briefly through the federal penitentiary in Atlanta during transit, which deepened his anxiety further. Atlanta housed numerous Washington, D.C. inmates cycling through the system. Barnes worried about crossing paths with James Carpenter or people connected to him. Family later believed officials knowingly placed Barnes near Carpenter during that layover. Bureau of Prisons denied that claim, stating Barnes remained isolated during transit. Despite those assurances, Barnes felt his situation slipping beyond administrative control. He communicated his fears again, stressing that any overlap with DC inmates placed him in danger. Those concerns did not delay the transfer process. Instead, movement continued according to schedule, following routes Barnes could not influence. Each mile south felt heavier than the last. On May 6, 2005, Barnes arrived at the United States Penitentiary Beaumont in Texas. Beaumont carried a violent reputation long before Barnes stepped off the transport bus. Inmate circles called it Bloody Beaumont, or the Thunderdome. Stories circulated about stabbings, cage fights, and unchecked internal violence. That reputation alone made Barnes uneasy before intake even started. Beaumont also housed a large population of Washington, D.C. inmates, estimated near 250 men. That concentration turned familiar hometown connections into potential threats immediately. Barnes recognized that recognition could happen within minutes. During intake processing, Barnes told staff directly about his cooperation history. He named James Carpenter specifically as someone he testified against during 2 D.C. murder trials. Barnes believed honesty with staff might trigger protective placement or separation measures. Instead, officials assigned him to the general population inside Delta Bravo unit. No protective custody order followed that disclosure.
So there you have it. That's what it is. You snitch, help out the authorities, and then you go to prison and tell them specifically who the threat is, who you testified against in 2 murder trials, 2 of them, against 2 murder cases. You would think they're going to put you in protective custody, or at least keep you away from that individual, but they're supposed to put you in protective custody. At that juncture, you're telling them that your life is in danger and that you're a certified snitch, that you snitched at least twice in court, in trials. And then you tell them, the individual, that you snitched on it, that he's right here where y'all trying to put me. No, put me over here in protective custody. And they put you over there with him anyway. Yeah, the police don't like snitches either. They think if you snitched on him, you'll snitch on me. They're venal, corrupt, crooked. So they don't like snitches. They put him over there with him. And let's see what the hell happened once he got over there. It didn't end well, that's for sure.
Separation plan accompanied the housing decision. Barnes entered the unit without extra monitoring or precautionary measures. The absence of safeguards did not surprise Barnes anymore, though it confirmed his worst expectations. Staff treated his warning as information logged rather than action required. Barnes realized the system viewed him as another body filling a bed. That understanding followed him as he stepped onto the tier. From that moment, Barnes knew survival depended on inmate reactions, not institutional planning. Once Barnes entered Delta Bravo unit, routine intake interactions began almost immediately. Inmates approached him casually, asking where he came from and what he was serving time for. Those questions sounded friendly on the surface, though Barnes recognized their purpose instantly. Barnes answered cautiously, attempting to minimize recognition. He gave a false name with an Arabic sound, hoping to deflect attention. That strategy failed faster than Barnes expected. Marwin Mosley, Michael Bureaucratic, and Charles Sherman represented the DC group inside Beaumont. Mosley studied Barnes closely, sensing familiarity beneath the false identity. Barnes's nervous energy and guarded responses raised suspicion. Mosley told the others he believed the new arrival was Keith Barnes. Bureaucratic later tricked Barnes into confirming his real name during conversation. Once verified, doubt disappeared entirely. Barnes's reputation followed him into the unit almost instantly. The DC inmates understood exactly who he was and what he represented. From that moment, Barnes became a marked presence. Word spread quietly rather than explosively, moving through looks and brief exchanges. Barnes remained unaware of how quickly confirmation traveled. Inside prison culture, silence often carries heavier meaning than confrontation. Within hours, the information reached the DC shot caller, known as Tone. That connection escalated the situation without Barnes ever realizing it. Later that day, Mosley met with other DC inmates in the recreation yard. They discussed Barnes's arrival and his cooperation against James Carpenter. Tone suggested handling the situation through a beating.
So as soon as he got there, he was found out, he was recognized, as he pretty much had predicted would happen. He came with some sort of, he came with an Arabic name and tried to put on some sort of accent to hide his identity. Bro, they immediately knew who he was. They immediately exposed him. That shit don't work. They been waiting on you. They said, that's that boy. They went out there and chopped it up. They held shop out there on the yard or whatever, in their cells, sending kites. Man, that's the boy. And then sinister machinations began to be cultivated. And eventually, apparently, brutally carried out.
To force protective custody. That approach aimed to remove Barnes without triggering severe consequences. Mosley rejected that suggestion outright. Mosley stated clearly that Barnes needed to die for cooperating. The discussion lacked theatrics or emotional speeches. It sounded practical, rooted in prison code enforcement. No formal vote followed, since Mosley had already decided. That determination set events in motion quickly. Planning happened fast, shaped by familiarity with unit routines.
So the shot caller said, just beat him up, just beat him down, beat him real bad, get him out of here, whatever. According to this. And then this dude said, nah, man, hell no. He gotta go. What you mean? Shot caller, tough guy, he's a snitch. You know the rules. Finna wrap him up. Apparently they did just that.
They chose Barnes' cell as the location for privacy and control. Bureaucratic would engage Barnes inside the cell to lower suspicion. Joseph Ebron, another DC inmate with a violent history, agreed to assist. Dinner movement offered the best opportunity. As chow time approached, movement inside the unit increased. Guards focused on escorting inmates toward the dining hall. Noise levels rose, masking unusual activity. Barnes remained in his cell, unaware that timing mattered now. While inmates queued for dinner, the plan reached execution stage. Ebron left his assigned unit, covering his head to avoid camera identification. He slipped into Delta Bravo unnoticed during general movement. Bureaucratic entered Barnes' cell first, striking up conversation casually. Barnes saw nothing unusual about the interaction. Within minutes, Mosley and Ebron entered the cell together. Bureaucratic exited quietly, taking position nearby. The decision had already been made earlier in the yard. Barnes never received a warning or chance to react. The transfer Barnes feared had delivered him exactly where the system left him. Dinner movement opened around early evening on May 7, 2005, which created predictable noise and distraction. Guards focused attention toward chow lines while inmates flowed through corridors with routine familiarity. That window mattered since housing units briefly loosened their usual stillness. Joseph Ebron used that moment to slip from Alpha Unit toward Delta Bravo. He covered his head with clothing, blending into movement patterns staff had seen countless times. Inside cell 305, Michael Bureaucratic entered first, keeping conversation light and ordinary. He spoke calmly, asking harmless questions meant to lower Barnes' awareness. Barnes responded cautiously, still unaware of decisions already finalized elsewhere. The interaction felt normal within prison rhythms, which reduced any instinct to react defensively. That calm allowed timing to line up precisely. Moments later, Marwin Mosley entered the cell with Joseph Ebron following close behind. The door closed quietly without drawing attention from the tier. There was no shouting, no arguing, no dramatic escalation preceding contact. Mosley moved directly behind Barnes, while Ebron positioned himself facing forward. Their coordination showed preparation rather than impulse. Ebron grabbed Barnes from the front, locking his arms tightly to restrict movement. Mosley applied a chokehold from behind, stabilizing Barnes's upper body immediately. Barnes had no room to break free once restraint took hold. Control happened quickly, preventing any opportunity to resist or call out. The cell remained quiet aside from brief physical struggle. Mosley then produced a homemade weapon and began stabbing Barnes repeatedly in the chest area. Each strike landed within a small, concentrated zone rather than scattered across the body. The focus targeted vital organs located beneath the left side of the chest. Ebron maintained his grip throughout, ensuring Barnes stayed immobilized. That restraint allowed precision rather than chaos. The attack lasted only minutes, though the damage inflicted proved catastrophic. Medical examiners later counted 106 stab wounds clustered within an area measuring roughly 8 inches. Those injuries punctured Barnes's heart, lungs, and liver repeatedly. Despite the
Wow, that's overkill. That's personal. That's what you call overkill. Anyone stabbed, stabbed 10 times. 106 times? That's a lot of work, bro. That takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of energy, seriously, to swing anything or just, if you had nothing in your hand, swing right now 106 times, especially, and hit something and see how exhausted you get or how it wears you out, wears your arm out or whatever. And when people do this, these sort of stabbings with this many stab wounds, they actually take breaks and then go back to killing for real because it's taxing. So to be able to stab this individual 106 times, some individuals had a lot of anger towards him, a lot of hatred. That takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of energy. You know, normally you just do it, bam. When you feel like the job is done, the person is no more, and you go on about your business. They had to know that he was dead, you know, within the first 10 stab wounds, 15, 20. And they still holding him up. And then he said that they concentrated on one particular part of the chest. So this was indeed calculated and planned out, this attack. They had planned it out wherever they did on the yard or whatever. And even the one individual walking in the side of the cell, getting behind him, and the other one facing him, all of this is, they worked all of this out at first, bro. You're going to be right here. I'm going to get behind here. You grab him right here. You know, and first we're going to take his guard down by going in there and just chilling. And when I walk behind him, they planned it all out. I'm gonna produce I'm gonna hit his ass right here. They hit him 106 times within an 8-inch parameter. So that means that's crazy. That's straight precision. That's straight aiming for one spot and just gunning on him in that one spot. Not just reckless, random, just swinging knives everywhere. He's got scratches here, back of his head, scratches over here, and that's how it normally happens. Because the individual was able to run, get away. He got scratches on his back and on his neck, on his face, hands. 106 times, and all in basically one spot. They just going to work on him in that one spot, knowing it's a wrap for you, buddy. In this one spot, they know what this finna do to him right there. That's great. They had straight hatred for this individual, for that snitching he allegedly did. And the police, well, they didn't like him much either, because certainly, well, they helped to put him in this situation. He put himself in this situation, if the allegations are true, of course. But the police could have protected him. There's a lot of snitches that survive and go home, survive prison, because they're in protective custody. Here, they didn't protect him. Out there in Texas, no, sir, they let it go.
Violence involved,
Crazy work.
the scene remained contained within the cell. No alarm sounded during the assault itself. Once Barnes lost consciousness, Mosley ceased stabbing while Ebron released his hold. Both men assessed the situation quickly without hesitation. Barnes showed no ability to respond or move. Mosley and Ebron lifted Barnes onto the top bunk deliberately. That placement reduced immediate visibility from the cell doorway. After positioning the body, Mosley and Ebron exited the cell separately. Bocote and Charles Sherman stood lookout nearby, monitoring hallway activity. The group blended back into routine inmate movement without raising suspicion. Ebron returned toward Alpha Unit during ongoing Chow flow. Mosley walked calmly away as if nothing unusual occurred. For several hours afterward, Barnes's cell remained closed and undisturbed. Guards conducted routine counts without opening the door. Blood pooled beneath the bunk slowly, seeping toward the cell threshold. The quiet allowed time to pass unnoticed. Barnes received no medical attention during that interval. Around 7:45 p.m., inmate Charles Giles noticed blood leaking.
So if he could have been saved, that all of that went out of the window. If there was a chance, and there probably was none, to be honest, because as we just heard, and as I just said, they hit him 106 times in the chest in one specific spot, basically, generally, where it's attacking him, where it's attacking his heart, his lungs. They know exactly what they're doing. They've studied this, where to hit him at to take him out. And once you hit him there probably 4 or 5 times, it's a wrap, 3 times, whatever. 106 times, who the hell's surviving that? So, but if there was a chance that he somehow still had any breath in his body, for a little while at least, struggling and fighting for life to hang on, hoping and praying for some sort of medical attention, it never came. They didn't find him until hours later. So if he was in there still alive, after all of those stab wounds, yeah, of course, he succumbed to his injuries. Crazy.
Under the door of cell 305. He alerted correctional officers immediately upon seeing the pool spread. Staff opened the cell and discovered Barnes lying motionless on the top bunk. The severity of the injuries became clear instantly. Emergency response followed only after discovery. Barnes was transported from USP Beaumont to a nearby hospital. Medical staff pronounced him dead later that evening. The official report listed multiple stab wounds as cause of death. That outcome confirmed Barnes's earlier fears about placement consequences. His death occurred less than 24 hours after arrival. Surveillance footage later showed Ebron entering Delta Bravo during dinner movement. Video also captured Mosley leaving the cell shortly afterward. Investigators reconstructed the sequence through inmate testimony and camera records. The timing aligned precisely with Chow procedures. That consistency supported conclusions about planning and execution. Inside Beaumont, the killing spread through inmate circles quickly once discovered. DC inmates understood the message being sent through the act. Cooperation carried consequences enforced regardless of time passed. The system treated the event as an internal security breach. Barnes's warnings echoed loudly after his death. The attack in cell 305 did not involve chaos or spontaneous violence. It followed a structured sequence shaped by prison routines. Every step relied on familiarity with movement patterns and supervision gaps. Barnes never had the opportunity to avoid the outcome once placed there. The hours between arrival and death reflected how fast reputation travels inside federal custody. By the time investigators secured the unit, the perpetrators had already returned to normal routines. Dinner trays had been cleared and the evening count approached. The institution continued functioning while Barnes lay dead. That reality underscored the disconnect between administrative assurances and lived consequences. Barnes's final transfer had delivered him exactly where his fears predicted. Once Keith Barnes was pronounced dead, federal response moved quickly, though urgency arrived far too late. FBI agents entered USP Beaumont within 24 hours, securing units and isolating potential witnesses. The Bureau of Prisons initiated an internal investigation alongside federal prosecutors from Eastern District of Texas. Attention centered on Delta Bravo unit movements during dinner procedures. Investigators already suspected coordination rather than spontaneous violence. Surveillance footage became central early. since cameras tracked inmate movement during Chow transitions. Video showed Joseph Ebron leaving Alpha Unit with his head partially covered. Footage later captured Ebron entering Delta Bravo at the exact window matching the estimated attack time. Mosley appeared on camera leaving Barnes' cell shortly afterward. Those images confirmed timing, sequence, and opportunity without requiring interpretation. Inmate testimony filled gaps that video could not cover directly. Charles Sherman provided early cooperation explaining planning discussions inside the recreation yard. He described Mosley's insistence that Barnes needed to die for cooperating against James Carpenter. Sherman detailed Bacote's role as decoy and lookout. His statements aligned with physical evidence and surveillance timelines. Michael Bacote later admitted involvement, acknowledging his role luring Barnes into conversation. Bacote explained how Mosley requested assistance and coordinated entry timing. He described standing watch outside the cell during the assault. That admission placed Bacote at the scene without minimizing responsibility. Prosecutors used his cooperation strategically. Marwin Mosley never reached trial. While awaiting proceedings, Mosley died by suicide inside federal custody in December 2007. His death removed the primary assailant from courtroom accountability. Investigators still relied on existing statements and evidence to reconstruct his actions. Mosley's absence shifted prosecutorial focus toward Joseph Ebron. Joseph Ebron's trial began in April 2009 inside Beaumont Federal Court.
That's wild. He killed himself? Man. This is wild work right here, though. Within 24 hours of this individual hitting that prison, talking about predicting your own death, he done wrote all these letters to these people, admitting to them that he's a snitch. Look, man, I'm a snitch. Don't send me here. Somebody's going to recognize me. He put it all in a letter, multiple letters as we've seen. And in each letter, he's saying the same thing, or some of the same things. He's reiterating in every letter, at least, that he's a snitch and that his life will be in danger in certain prisons or at this certain prison. Somehow he was still able to slip through the cracks when he got there, he told him. This one individual in particular is going to attack me. You know, I snitched on this individual twice. They're going to get me. Nope. Put him over there anyway. So now old boy done offed himself. And so now they finna try to put everything on him, I'm sure. Somebody gonna have to pay for it. But that's crazy. That was a vicious attack. They all telling on each other and telling on themselves and all that. And that's how it works too. But I would say that, hell, being a snitch, it ain't worth it. What are you getting? You still get life in prison? And then, not only do you get life in prison, the individuals that you snitched on have people there, or they are there, because you snitched on them, so they're in prison too. And the people that you snitched on them too don't even protect you. They throw you right in the lion's den with these individuals that you got life in prison. No, they're waiting on you, man. They hate your guts. They sitting in prison. They're blaming you. That's why this individual was insisting that he had to die. They were talking about a DP beating him down or whatever. The shot caller was saying, nah, man, this dude got to freaking die, bro. That's it, period. The hell y'all talking about? I'll do it. And he went there and did it. So let this be a PSA, if anything but snitching. Don't do it. It ain't going to help you none. You snitch and still get life in prison. You snitch and get killed in prison for snitching. They didn't protect you. What did you snitch for? Be smart, people. Get caught up in something, do your time. But the thing is, just don't get caught in a situation to begin with. where you're going to have to snitch on somebody or have any problems, man. That's it. Because once you get caught up in it, then you're in it. Now you're ready to snitch when your life is on the line. But no, don't do it to begin with, brothers.
Prosecutors presented Ebron as active participant rather than secondary actor. Evidence showed Ebron restraining Barnes throughout the stabbing sequence. Witness testimony emphasized Ebron's agreement to assist, despite alternatives suggested earlier. That framing established intent rather than passive involvement. During trial, details emerged gradually, shaping the jury's understanding piece by piece. Medical examiners testified about the wound concentration and fatal organ damage. The number of stab wounds, totaling 106, drew visible reactions from jurors. The clustering of injuries suggested methodical execution rather than chaotic violence. That medical testimony carried significant weight. Defense counsel attempted to portray Ebron as follower rather than planner. They highlighted Mosley's dominant role during discussions. Prosecutors countered by emphasizing Ebron's voluntary participation and physical restraint role. Surveillance footage reinforced that argument visually. Jurors appeared attentive throughout those presentations. When sentencing phase began, prosecutors introduced Ebron's prior convictions. Ebron already carried 2 murder convictions from Washington, D.C. cases during his youth. That history framed him as continuing threat within custody environments. Prosecutors argued life imprisonment would not prevent future violence. The jury deliberated for several days before returning verdict. In May 2009, jurors sentenced Joseph Ebron to death for Barnes's murder. The courtroom reaction reflected gravity rather than celebration. Barnes's name finally received full attention during sentencing statements. Prosecutors acknowledged Barnes's cooperation history openly. That recognition marked the first time Barnes was discussed as more than inmate number. Ebron later appealed his conviction unsuccessfully. Years later, his death sentence was commuted to life without parole. That outcome occurred long after Barnes's family endured the trial process. For investigators, the case closed officially. For Barnes, truth arrived posthumously. Barnes's family learned details slowly through media reports and court testimony. Initial notifications from prison officials lacked clarity regarding circumstances. Relatives relied on journalists and attorneys for fuller explanations. That delayed understanding deepened frustration and grief. Barnes's mother feared retaliation even after convictions. Despite successful prosecutions, no Bureau of Prisons officials faced disciplinary action. Administrative reviews concluded procedures were followed appropriately. Placement decisions remained justified through existing classification standards. That outcome reinforced criticism from prison advocates. Institutional accountability never extended beyond individual perpetrators. USP Beaumont continued operating under similar conditions following the case. Inmate violence incidents persisted over subsequent years. The facility retained its reputation within prison circles. Operational changes remained minimal despite public scrutiny. Barnes's death did not alter systemic practices. Within prison culture, Barnes became referenced quietly as example. Cooperators understood the warning embedded in his story. Transfers remained moments of vulnerability rather than protection. Barnes's name circulated less as person, more as lesson. That framing stripped humanity from his outcome. The phrase Barnes repeated before transfer resurfaced among those who knew him. He said they were sending him to his grave. That statement proved accurate without exaggeration. Barnes recognized danger long before staff acknowledged it. His awareness arrived too early to save him. The story ends without dramatic closure or institutional reform. Barnes's death followed patterns visible years earlier. Warnings went documented, yet unaddressed meaningfully. The Range Rover.
All right, there you have it, people. Barnes, Keith Barnes. Whew. Wow. That's crap. I remember this story actually, but that was a brutal attack, man. Brutal, vicious attack. Had to have been bloody. That dude, man, he had to have been going through it while he was getting attacked like that. He can't move, they holding him down, and the other one just hitting him. That was excruciating pain he was in. just feeling helpless and like, damn, just sitting there getting stabbed, and he can't. Oh man, I mean, everyone be careful with the decisions that you make, the decisions that we make, myself included. Every day, the decisions that we make every day. Every day we have to choose to make the right decision, bro. Every day. Don't get caught up in a situation where you are even catching a case, and therefore then feel like you're put in a position where you have to tell. Telling is never okay. It's never justified. If you get caught up in your situation, then you just have to deal with it as a man. You got caught, not the other individual. Deal with it. But of course, that has never actually been the case, or not all of the time. And you put yourself in a situation because, as we just seen, I mean, you're risking your life when you tell. So you call yourself getting from under going to prison for the rest of your life. And in this case, that was not the case. He still got life in prison. But even if you went home for telling, and your crimees, the people that you committed the crime with, got life in prison, you're home, you're still vulnerable to an attack. If you go to prison, you're really in trouble. So just don't put yourself in those sort of situations to begin with, and we don't have to worry about it. Wild work there, man. Stay safe and stay free, people.